Hi, hi, and welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to a new Black Desert mobile video. Okay, so for today, we are going to take a look at the latest and upcoming rework or buff for the Grandmaster, which is aka the Ascension Striker. Right, so without further ado, let's take a look and jump into the Korean patch notes. Alright. So once again, this is actually in Korean, but translated by the built-in Chrome translator. So some of the names for the skills might be weird, right? So investment is actually just Grandmaster. Okay, investment. Yeah, I know it's a funny name, but okay, let's move on. Okay, so I'm not going to go through this entire text, okay, but mainly what all this is saying is, okay, is that this latest update or improvement to the Grandmaster, okay, is more about helping improve his ability to, or rather, how good he is for mass PvP, right? Okay, and they added a new continuous technology called Indomitable, right? Okay, so basically this decreases the amount of damage that you take when your Grandmaster is CC'd, right? Incapacitated, right? And using the Kamgang technique. So Kamgang is basically most likely shoulder thrust, right? Twice increases the damage of the next skill, which can be easily achieved because Grandmaster is a combo class, right? Okay, so for mass PvP, so the main highlight for this rework or buff is that okay, for shoulder thrust, so in addition to just FG, your frontal guard, okay, now you also get super armor, okay, around your Grandmaster and at the back, okay, but only for PvP outside of the arena. Yeah, it would be OP if it was applied in the arena as well, alright? Okay, and one of the other highlights of this rework or buff is that okay, you can also use shoulder thrust to cancel or do skill cancel animations, right? To cancel other skills. Okay, but not all skills. Okay, but we'll do a side-by-side comparison later when we dive into the game. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so this new Indomitable technology basically is a new passive that decreases the damage you take, okay, by 10% when your character is CC'd. Alright, for example, on the ground. Okay, so it's a passive and you don't have to do anything to gain it. Okay, but for this, right, okay, this Gum technology is basically referring to shoulder, most likely referring to shoulder thrust. Okay, and after using it twice, okay, you increase the damage of the next skill that you use by 20%. Right? Okay, and moving on. Okay, knee hammer. Okay, knee hammer is just knee hammer. Okay. Okay, so in addition to the increased PVE and PvP damage, as shown here, right, seems like they improved the transition. Okay, after you use the flow on knee hammer, okay, from knee hammer, so the transition from the flow on knee hammer to other skills. Okay, later we'll do a side-by-side comparison in the game as well. Alright, and moving on. Okay, Gang again. So this is basically shoulder thrust. Okay, Okay, so what this line is saying that is that you can use shoulder thrust to cancel other skills. Okay, but not all skills and not in all situations. Okay, later we'll do a side-by-side comparison in the game between the global version and the latest Korean version as well. Okay, so this is an improvement where you can use the kick after shoulder thrust faster, right? Okay, so just now we mentioned the rear super armor that only applies when in any PvP out of the arena. So this is what this is referring to. And increase PVE and PvP damage for shoulder thrust. Okay, moving on. Okay, so this next skill is actually just referring to disrespect, alright? Which is your grabbing skill. Okay, so they improve the transition from your grabbing skill to other skills. Right, later we'll do a side-by-side comparison as well. Alright, moving on. Okay, so this is a funny translated name, but whole hanger is basically referring to cheap shot, right? Okay, so the skill animation has been increased in terms of its speed, alright? It seems like the flow has been increased to be faster as well, according to this line. Okay, and once again, increase PVE and PvP damage. Alright, and moving on. Okay, right. So this is actually referring to full force. Alright. Okay, they reduce the number of attacks. I'm guessing this is the number of hits, right? Okay, so what this line is saying is that instead of stun or successful 2 hits, so stun here translated is actually days, okay? Yeah, so this is actually days, okay, not stun on the global version, okay, because the built-in translator provided by Chrome is not exactly perfect. Yeah, so it has been changed to days on as long as if you can land 1 hit with a full force, right, your opponent will be days, right, just the first hit. Okay, alright, so once again, because of that, increase PvE and PvP damage, and seems like they increase the attack range as well. Yeah, alright, moving on. Okay, Hell Bang Chu. This is actually Hell Sweep. Alright. Okay, the attack range has been increased. Okay. So most likely this is saying that the range has been increased to include the back area of Hell Sweep. So that includes enemies who are behind you, alright? Okay, and that includes for the flow as well. And increase PvE and PvP damage, right, as shown here. Okay, moving on. Okay, crouch wolf. So this is actually energy vacuum, right? Increase PvE and PvP damage. Okay. And moving on to the next skill. Okay, Song Pangak. Okay, so this is actually Gale Force. Okay, once again increase PVE and PvP damage. Alright, moving on. Okay, and lastly we have Maru Aurum. Okay, so this is actually referring to your 11 skill uppercut, or rather rising uppercut. Okay, once again increase PVE and PvP damage. Alright. Okay, so now that we have gone through the patch notes, the Korean patch notes, okay, let's jump into the game to do some side-by-side comparison between the current global version and the latest updated Korean version. Let's go. Okay, welcome back. Okay, now we're back in the game. Okay, so let's jump and dive into the first skill, which will do the side-by-side comparison. Okay, so first up we'll do the side-by-side comparison for shoulder thrust and see what has changed between the current global version and the newly updated Korean version. So let's go. Alright, next we're gonna do a side-by-side comparison, using shoulder thrust as an animation cancelling skill. So we are going to cancel our 11 skill rising uppercut, which is over here, using shoulder thrust. So once again, let's start with the global version on the left. Alright, now let's take a look at the updated Korean version to the right. Alright, so as you can see, you can now use shoulder thrust to cancel skills such as your rising uppercut. So there are some other skills which you can cancel using shoulder thrust. So this is indeed a good update, right? So let's move on to the next side-by-side comparison. Next let's move on to the next side-by-side comparison. We'll do for full force, right? So let's jump right into it. Now we're gonna do a side-by-side comparison for full force between the current global version and the newly updated Korean version, right? So first up, the global version on the left. And now let's take a look at the Korean version to the right. Alright, so that's the new full force. It seems slightly faster, and a better animation as well. So let's move on to the next comparison. And next let's move on to the next skill, which is chip shots, which we'll do once again the side-by-side comparison for. So let's go. Alright, now we're going to do a side-by-side comparison for chip shots and its increased attack speed and the transition to other skills such as Gale Force, for example. So first up, the global version on the left. Alright, and now the Korean updated version to the right. Alright, so that was cheap shot with a transition to Gale Force, right? So the animation seems faster and the transition to other skills, for example Gale Force, seems like a better transition now. It seems smooth. So let's move on to the next comparison. Alright, moving on. We'll just do and go through the side-by-side comparisons for the skills that actually have changes made to them, right? In addition to increased PVE and PvP damage. So the next skill we are going to do the the side-by-side comparison is for knee hammer. Alright, so let's go. Alright, now we're going to take a side-by-side comparison between the global version of doing a transition from knee hammer with the flow to other skill sets compared to the Korean version. Okay, so first let's start with the global version on the left. Okay, so that is from knee hammer to gale force. Now let's take a look at the Korean version to the right. Okay, so that was using knee hammer's flow and doing a transition to other skills such as, for example, gale force on the Korean version, yeah? Okay, overall it seems slightly faster, the transition, yeah? Okay, so let's move on to the next comparison. Alright, and moving on, the next skill which we'll do the side-by-side comparison is for Hell Sweep. Alright, so let's go. Alright, now we're going to do a side-by-side comparison for Hell Sweep between the global version and the Korean version. Right, so first up, the global version on the left. Alright, so now let's take a look at the Korean version to the right. Alright, so that was the newly updated Hell Sweep on the Korean version. Seems like they increased the AoE radius of the skill, especially on your character's back, slightly. Yeah, so a small improvement. Okay, so let's move on to the next comparison. Alright, and lastly, the last side-by-side comparison that we're doing is for Disrespect, which is your grabbing skill. Okay, so let's dive into that right away. Alright, now we're going to do a side-by-side comparison, okay, for the transition between Disrespect, aka our grabbing skill, to another skill such as Hell Sweep. Alright, so first up, the global version on the left. Alright, so that's the global version. Now let's take a look at the latest updated Korean version to the right. Okay, so that was Hell Sweep. Okay, after Disrespect. Okay, seems like there's a slightly faster transition now. Okay, after the grab. Okay, seems like a small improvement, yeah. Okay, and now that we have gone through all the changes, okay, for this rework or buff for the Grandmaster, aka Striker Ascension, let's take a look at how he fares against other classes in the arena. Let's go. Alright, we have a level 64. Is that a Berserker? Okay, let's see how the updated Grandmaster plays against this Berserker, yeah? And GG well played. Alright, looks like the same level 64 Berserker. And GG well played. Alright, once again the same level 64 Berserker. And GG well played. So as you can see, the transitions between some of the skills, okay, is much faster now. Okay, so seems like this is a good rework and buff in general. Alright, so if you find this short update on the rework and buff for the Grandmaster entertaining or helpful, do remember to like, share, and subscribe. And as always, stay awesome and stay safe, and look forward to our next upcoming Black Desert mobile video. Cheers, man.